Pop quiz that only contains one question. What do the energy beams shown on screen have in common with each other? It relates to the title of the video. If you said it's as hot or hotter than the sun, you'd be correct. And to be quite frank, the takes I have today might have been forged in the fiery pits of apocalypse. Something I noticed when it comes to fan bases with extensive lore and not everything is easily digestible material like, a show or a set of movies, that we tend to, and walk with me for a bit, I'm gonna rage bait a select group of people, LARP our opinions in a way to fit in. And I do not care. I'm not giving LARP back until superhero fans can properly reclaim the word goon for our henchmen. So never, I don't know what to tell you, equivalent exchange. But these universal takes have been created because no one is willing or cares enough to challenge them, so they become rooted as common knowledge when it was just a take that was parroted by posers who haven't even read the source material. In the superhero fandom, this has become quite the transcendent phenomenon, affecting most consumers and at one point, even myself. But there became a point where I was doing a binge reading of some of my favorite characters and teams that I would eventually stumble across a book that is hated by the majority, and I had to make a decision to read it or skip it. Now, I won't lie, this had me pondering my life choices up until this point for a good 20 minutes, but it did lead to me coming up with a way of thinking that I think would be generally helpful for most readers or just viewers of superhero media. When you engage with bad content, look at it like a learning experience. Most of these projects aren't fully bad from an objective standpoint. Usually, there's some good ideas in there that you can find along with the bad. The problem usually stems from executing those ideas poorly. Maybe there's some really great things in there that gets overshadowed by the bad, and when that happens, I don't feel like it wasted my time and it was an actual helpful experience for my reading comprehension abilities. I know there's a lot of people who look at it from a time perspective, but I'm telling you, if you only engage with media that a lot of people are telling you is really good, you're slowly losing the ability to explain why something is good. You're letting people do half the thinking for you, especially if you're one of those people who need an analysis of a show through, a video essay to form a proper opinion, or to understand why a project is good, and then use what they say as a script for any conversation you have about the story instead of using it as a way to see another person's perspective. I am telling you, there will come a point where you're not going to be able to appreciate certain media because you're only consuming masterpieces. That might be a bit of hyperbole, but all I'm saying is you need bad media to really appreciate the good, and it really allows you to develop some much needed critical thinking to form your own opinion. And yes, I'm speaking in bold because general consensus can flip on a dime when it comes to the internet, and then you'll start feeling like two different people if you try to follow the bandwagon. I'm promising you, you will find some diamonds in the rough, actual gems that you are going to wonder why they were completely shunned. Even when it comes to characters, there will be characters that you won't even know are really cool, and to go on the opposite side of the fence, there are even characters who are glazed to oblivion, and then you start learning more about them and you realize they are overrated. Crazy, I know. Either way, here are my hottest takes for the DC universe. Tell me yours down below, and if you agree, remember to like, subscribe, comment, all those good things, and yeah, let's get to it. Starting things off with a bang, and I know some of y'all are gonna hate me right off the bat, especially if you're a DCAU enthusiast, but if you're a comic fan, it's a pretty common take to have, and that is, out of the four corpsmen, which include Hal Jordan, Guy Gardner, John Stewart, and Kyle Rayner, John is by far the least interesting and most boring Lantern out of the mainstream favorites. I'd even go as far to say that Jessica Cruz is more interesting than him. I'd rather read her, but the worst part about this is that it was completely unnecessary, and it didn't need to be the state of the character. What does that even mean? Well, from an objective standpoint with no bias, I can look at the other three main Lanterns and pull 5 modern stories at the bare minimum that showcase why this character is really special, and believe it or not, I'm lowballing hard by limiting it to 5. When it comes to John, I could probably give you 2, maybe 3 if I'm being generous, and all of those stories are decades apart in publication. From a solo story perspective, his best 2 books are Green Lantern Mosaic, which will probably never get reprinted ever again because the guy who made it was a literal criminal, to put it lightly, and Green Lantern War Journal by Philip Kennedy Johnson. Mosaic is a very interesting psychedelic story that not only showcases the many facets of John's character, but it also details his ascension into, spoiler alert, you have been warned, to being the first and only person to become an actual guardian of the universe. Yes, he was up there in power and status with the Blue Leprechauns, and it put him in a league of his own, despite it being quite short-lived. War Journal took a very grounded and human approach, which balanced his new set of willpower abilities, which from what I remember came from the Godstorm and the Source, making him the strongest Lantern at the time. Despite this, he was dealing with his mother's dementia and her remembering and believing her daughter and, John's little sister was still alive, despite her dying when she was very young. These are 2 wildly different stories, but if I were to ask somebody to make the most obvious connection between the 2 series and what they focus on, other than a lot of trauma, which let's be honest is quite a brilliant tool for creating compelling characters, it would be him being an architect, solving complex and interesting problems using an analytical mind that built scenarios where he would win from the ground up, which was and always will be the coolest way to approach John rather than the normal brash superheroics synonymous with the medium. Unfortunately, ever since Jeff Johns' run, which did right by every other character other than Stewart, at least in the long run, was the focus on him being a military man and a part of the Marines. While this isn't inherently bad when they combine both approaches of his character, usually they just focus on him being the guy who creates a bunch of different guns and is very stoic. The problem is that I can name so many heroes with a military background. Even Hal is a part of the Air Force, but that works for his maverick personality. For John, it makes him more generic as he swims in a sea of familiarity with characters who are way more interesting than him with that military background setup. And that's really what it comes down to. John was never really not interesting, it's that the version of him that should have been pushed to the forefront just wasn't. The architect angle, the problem solver, the guy that was literally called the master builder before the Lego movie even existed, that guy was the one who stood out. When you move away from that, you lose what made him special in the first place. There aren't that many superhero architects, and John being that along with having a Green Lantern ring seemed like a match made in heaven. It's very similar to Kyle Rayner and him being an artist. Both of them work surprisingly well as a concept, but unfortunately, he has never been used to the fullest. His potential was always there, they just never knew what to do with him. And yes, I know I said potential, move on. But the next character that I want to talk about, this is going to be a bit of a doozy, and I don't know if I can explain myself to the fullest, but it is Nightwing and his most controversial run. When it comes to the most hated runs in Nightwing's catalog, there are 3 eras that usually take the cake. The Rick Grayson run, universally, the Tom Taylor run for veterans of the character, and the Devin Grayson run for the uninitiated or for those who genuinely can't handle certain graphic content, which is totally fine by the way, and I'm not here to change your mind. If you feel that way, you feel that way, and that's all there is to it. But I feel like there's a lot of things taken out of context and a lot of things that have been regurgitated despite being very false, in particular about the writer's character and the amount of hoops people will go through to hate on her despite only knowing shady details from word of mouth. While all of this can be researched on your own, and believe me, there is a lot, down below you'll find a link to a huge debunk post regarding Devin Grayson and every major claim made against her, and her responses by a resident Rocket Raccoon fan, Tiger Coon. So huge shout out to them for gathering everything, and make sure to check it out if you're interested. And before you start spewing hate down below, I'd like to say one thing. Educate yourself before you start hating anyone. That should be a rule everyone follows, especially during an age of generalization and misinformation. I believe that when it comes to solo Nightwing comics, she is definitely one of the best Nightwing writers of all time, along with Peter Tomasi and Dan Watters. If you're a fan of this channel, for a while now at least, you know how much I like to mention Dan Watters, but fun fact, the current era of Nightwing by Watters is very much inspired by Devin Grayson's work, as it was the first set of Nightwing issues that Dan read, and that very much was imprinted in his brain. I, for one, could see it in his writing, as just like with Grayson, he would drop tidbits of characterization seamlessly that would make any hardcore fan jump for joy to see him portrayed this way in the modern age. Not to say he's completely like Devin's Nightwing as he has grown since then, but there obviously should be some connective tissue as they literally portray the same character, but many years apart. But focusing back on Devin Grayson's run, I actually read all of it in its entirety last year, and it was always something on my bucket list as I couldn't understand how something so polarizing could come from the same person who created one of my favorite Batman content pieces ever, like at least in the 2000s, with her Gotham Knights run. That is a criminally underrated book, but it's also a great Bat Family book that gets to the heart of most of the characters involved, including one Dick Grayson. In fact, there was an Azrael Nightwing centered issue that really caught my eye as their rivalry was recently written to great effect, mind you, by Dan Watters in the massive Gotham Nocturne storyline going on in Detective Comics about 2 years ago. Her run also introduced the fantastic moment where Bruce formally adopts Grayson in canon, so there was genuinely no way this run could be garbage, and to make me even more skeptical, it feels like I'm playing Uno and I'm dropping half my hand in one go, but then I read her Titans run and it became one of my favorite team books of all time, and once again, Nightwing was written perfectly. Also read Batman Chronicles number 7, I'm done, but you get the point. It's not like she didn't know her stuff, so I had high expectations going into this book, and for the most part, barring some decisions with Tarantula that was definitely made worse due to editorial cutting her run short, it felt like a proper continuation of Dixon's run, but with more gas in the tank. It felt like it was always moving, always approaching the next big thing, while in Dixon's run, to give a comparison, it felt more like Tom Taylor's run, but with a lot more edge, which does make it better by default, but it's the same flavor of meandering storylines that somewhat feel like a day in the life of a character where our boy is just moving with the flow of whatever Bloodhaven throws at him that day. Something I always say about Devin Grayson's run, however, is that while you might get mad at the story, you'll never be bored, and when she was putting her foot on the gas, the reader definitely felt the pressure Nightwing was going through, and I loved it. This run also felt like a character study in every sense of the word, diving into the minute details of what makes him tick, from his workaholic tendencies to how he can become horribly insensitive when he's angry, to constantly trying to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, to even exploring how he internalizes everything after the Tarantula incident, refusing to let the Bat family see him as somebody who failed to redeem her or save Blockbuster, which turns him into a husk of a person just going through the motions while bottling everything up so he doesn't feel like a burden to everybody else. He's kind of like a hypocrite where he doesn't want to say his emotional feelings to other people if it feels too vulnerable and too much like a failure, but he always tries to get other people to open up. Of course, this does bring us back to his Atlas complex. This is all a whole loop of character work at the end of the day. Also, you can't really call yourself a big fan of the Slade-Nightwing rivalry if you hate this run, because there are 3 really good stories in this book that showcase their ever-evolving dynamic. My favorite being Renegade, where Grayson trains Ravenger, Rose Wilson, Deathstroke's daughter, and plants the seeds for her eventual redemption into a hero. This pays off fully by the end of the run and leads directly into her fantastic time with the Teen Titans after Infinite Crisis. This run also would have been looked at far more fondly in my opinion if the engagement to Barbara at the end of the story actually stuck instead of being dropped by Bruce Jones in editorial, because that alone would have changed how a lot of people remember it. The general overall perception definitely would have changed, but But to move ourselves to a character who also had story decisions that don't really line up with how things should have probably played out, let's talk about Wally West. While this might sound crazy, in the Flash community, many people have actually agreed to this despite Wally being a beloved character. He needs to die, or at the very least be retired, which would be the preferred option. When it comes to the Flash, there are two main tenets that make up his character. He's always in motion and should never be stagnant, both in terms of movement and the second tenet, which is a legacy. As a concept, the Flash has made 2 successful mantle passes and almost had a third with Bart Allen, as DC understood that this is what made the Flash special, the fact that they're more willing than most to switch out certain characters for the sake of progressing the mantle the way it was intended to be, biblically accurate Flash. But unfortunately, people did not like Bart's stint, so what they had to do was call up the cleanup crew, Wally West, to usurp the mantle. When Barry came back to take Wally's place in the late 2000s, early 2010s, Wally came back for that mantle in the 2020s after his rebirth storyline Barry's was concluded, and it seems like Wally is going to stay as the main Flash for at least the next 5 years, which is completely understandable considering that we just had the Jeremy Adams run, loved by the normal man, the Spurrier run, loved by the intellectual man, and the current Ryan North run, which everyone seems to love. So yeah, everything is balanced as it should be. Wally has been pretty damn consistent, but what I need to happen is that by the next decade, 2030, we need a new Flash. My candidate will always be Irey West, Speed Force prodigy and the daughter of Wally and Linda Park West. At the moment, she has 4 things going for her that would spice up the mantle. 1. She would be the first female Flash, Jessie does not count, and the first Flash to be a teenager, which would be kinda sick. 2. She has her own Speed Force Sharingan and can copy Speed Force signatures, energy signatures, and abilities, but just with none of the proficiency. 3. She's been learning some chronokinesis timey-wimey stuff that I can't explain to you without breaking my brain. And 4. She already is the most likely to become the Flash based on the futures that Wally has already seen and the Kingdom Come timeline, which gave her one of the sickest Flash costumes ever of all time. The drip is immaculate. This is really needed in my opinion because not only is her dynamic with the family alone really good, and what we see with her brother could be really interesting considering that he doesn't want to be a hero at all, but it also just allows the Flash mythos to evolve again instead of being in that loop, which it should never be in, considering, of course, it's the Flash. He's meant to break records and all barriers and to pass the torch properly. That is what his mantle is for. DC currently is kind of struggling to commit to anything long term, but Irey is one of those rare opportunities where everything lines up perfectly in terms of power, personality, and narrative potential. And this is where Wally's role becomes ever more interesting because a lot of people, including myself, don't want him gone completely, but rather repositioned into something closer to that Gojo archetype. The strongest in the room, the safety net of the entire mythos, but not the main character anymore. Someone who only steps in when things have gone completely off the rails, where his presence alone immediately raises the stakes and gets everyone hyped because now you know it is serious. From a narrative standpoint, Wally has already reached that level where he's borderline untouchable when it comes to the Speed Force, so instead of constantly trying to challenge him in ways that feel forced, you lean into that and make him the ceiling that everyone else is trying to reach. At the same time, it gives him space to mentor Irey properly, not just as a hero, but as someone who understands the burden of the mantle better than anyone. It adds a new dimension to his character where his growth isn't about becoming faster or stronger anymore, but about letting go, guiding the next generation, which he is very bad at. He is not a good mentor, look at Bart, and trusting that legacy that he helped build so that it can stand without him being at the center of it. So at the end of the day, this isn't about disrespecting Wally because he's already proven himself to be the best Flash. It's about letting the story flow to its natural conclusion so that somebody else can run forward, so somebody else can carry on his race. The Flash is meant to be in motion, so eventually that motion means that you have to move on. But yeah guys, let me know down below, what are some of your hottest takes? Do you agree or disagree with my takes? Let me know down below. Remember to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications so you know when a new video goes live, and yeah, see you all later, take care, deuces, peace.